Hello and welcome to another webcast with CAPPM. Today we're going to talk about road mapping. My name is Alpha Weiler. I'm with CAPPM Product Marketing, and my friend Brian Toplicar is going to take us through a demo showing the great new tool road mapping that we have seen more and more customers deploy and started using. It's a way to plan faster. It's a way to evolve your portfolio management from being this draggy, slow annual planning we do every year to something that is more modern, more agile, a little bit faster. We will have a Q&A at the end of the event, so as questions pop up in your head, why don't you type them in the window down in the right-hand corner, and we'll try to address both of them in the last few minutes of the event. With that, Brian, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Alf. Let me just start out by making sure my screen is coming through okay for everyone and we can see my presentation.
It looks great.
Looks great. Okay, perfect. So like Alf mentioned, my name is Brian Coppola. I work at the Presales organization here at Broadcom. I've been supporting CAPPM for the last 5 years. I actually come from a customer local here in Dallas, so I've seen both the sides of the tool of implementing and actually using it. And in addition to that, I've really seen CAPPM add some really great, interesting content as the years have progressed. And I have to say the road mapping is something that I've been really, really excited about. So really glad to be able to talk about that today. So with that said, let's get into presentation. Just have a couple of quick slides I wanted to show before we jump directly into the product. And the first one is, the how do we actually come to adding in road mapping into our tool? And really, it started a couple of years ago. We began to research into how can we reinvent investment planning. And we had hundreds of interviews with our customers, and some of the reoccurring themes that we heard from them is one of the first ones is planning should be dynamic. So we expect our planning to be disrupted every quarter. Planning needs to be a simple process that allows us to easily pivot on new opportunities and to meet new threats. And another one that we've heard consistently was too much detail is a barrier to planning. You heard Alf allude to this a little bit earlier, but we may need some robust business cases or project estimates for the current work we're launching, but going through an exercise like that for an entire year can be very, very difficult. And often this slows everything down, and people really only have the appetite to do that very, very infrequently, so something like once a year. And so that causes this serious organizational fatigue, and then you miss out on what is the actual main source of innovation and demand in the business, and that's the stakeholder driving this business. So these people aren't filling out business cases. They're steering the business, and they need a simple way for us to help them plan these initiatives that will allow them to achieve their business outcomes. And with road mapping, you'll start to see that the best decisions are made in context. It should be lightweight, it should be visual, and it should allow you to be able to present to your business partners to get a shared understanding of the work that we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so with that said, let me actually jump in to CAPPM, and we're going to start working with the live tool. Just one second, excuse me. Okay, so I've started out here with the very basics of a roadmap in CAPPM. Each one of these blue bars you see on the screen represents some level of investment. And I'm using the word investment because it doesn't necessarily have to be a project. This could be any work that we're tracking or planning to. Right now, I have the roadmap broken into quarters, and we're looking across 1 year. That's a configuration that you can do on the fly. So we can change the timelines. Maybe we're interested in looking at a 3-year time period. We can stretch this out and drill in as necessary. So right now, we're just visualizing the work. It's very easy for me to add and move these different investment rounds as we begin to plan. So I can drag and drop these into different areas. I can quickly add a new investment to the roadmap as well. Just simply drag it, drop it on the screen, and then I can begin to add details to it. Now, where this road mapping begins to show a lot of value is when we begin adding additional context. So right now, we're simply looking at it at a timeline view, but I can begin to say, let's take a look at this from a strategic perspective. So I'm going to add swim lanes where now we're organizing our investments based on our corporate strategy. So I can quickly start to see how do these different investments align and what do we have that's mapping back to these different strategies or capabilities. Now, these are all configurable, and you can do this on the fly. It doesn't require administration or anyone with a technical background to create it. It's simply a list, and we can create multiple different ways to slice and dice these investments. So here you can see I have a few different here, and we'll show how to actually flip between these in just a moment. So now I've added strategy as a context of these swim lanes. I can now additionally start to add coloring to pick additional context up. So I'll add in a stakeholder. And so now we've actually colored these investments by the stakeholder in the business that's owning them. And you can see that denoted down here. So we're looking across all of this data, and we can now start to see very, very visually, easy to understand who owns what and how does it roll up. Now, additional to that, we can start looking at some metrics. And for instance, let me just add a couple example metrics here. I'm going to add in headcount. We'll look at overall capital costs and operating costs, just for our example here today. And now I've quickly added them on, and you can see now we've got these little badges on each one of these investments that are representing the current data that's available. And then within each swim lane, this is being summarized over here on the left-hand side. So you can start to see how are we actually investing, how many headcount are we using, and again, just like the other things that we've discussed before, these are configurable. So we can adjust, add different badges, and change what we're looking at in a particular roadmap view. Now, we mentioned several times earlier on about how these detailed business cases can actually be a barrier for planning. And these targets that we're seeing on the screen here can be used to do what we call a notional plan. So very, very lightweight. If we were to add an investment just directly onto the roadmap, we can begin to do some ballparking on what we think that this might take from these targets. So I could say, we think this will take about 50 headcount to complete. Maybe it's about $150,000 in capital and about $175,000 in operating costs. So we haven't committed to anything in here, and we haven't sent our teams down a road to collect this detailed information by building a full-on project schedule and things of that nature. We can start to see, does this fall in where we need it to fall in, and do we have the resources to even take this on? So one of the things we found is these businesses that we work with are collecting all of this data, and then at the end of the day, only about 10 to 20% of the business cases that they create are actually selected to move forward. So if you can imagine 8 out of 10 of those demand items being rejected and not going anywhere, that's a lot of work, a lot of wasted time that we think we can help you get more efficient with doing that planning process up front. Okay, so now we've added some context to our roadmap. We're looking at the different swim lanes. We're looking at some targets. Now I wanted to show we also have the ability to highlight dependencies between different roadmap items here as well. So you can see I have a dependency between these two as a start to finish. We also have dependencies over on this side of the screen. And that's just another easy, quick way to visualize how these roadmap items relate to each other on the screen. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how we can actually slice and dice this up. Each one of these views can be saved. So for instance, right now we're looking at it at a view from a strategic perspective, but maybe I'm interested in looking at this from a launch state perspective. So now I have these roadmap items organized by where they are in our launch cycle. So depending on which audience I'm going to present to, we can have a saved view that's ready for them. So I can have multiple different ways to display this, and every time I present, I can display it in the way that makes sense, the most sense to my audience. Okay, so in addition to being able to save different ways of looking at this information, we can also save multiple scenarios. So when we're looking at scenarios in PPM, we can create a first baseline scenario. and then compare that to our current plan. So right now, I've overlaid our initial plan versus our current planning scenario, and we can see, for instance, this pay-by-phone initiative has significant deltas in the timeline. I can click here and start to drill in and see what exactly are those deltas. It's very easy for me to see how our plan has evolved and changed as we've been moving forward. Now, this information can come from those notional plans that we made up front, or this data can be synced with investments that are live inside the product as well. So I can sync this information directly with PPM and update this information as the execution is going on. So as real-time financial plans are built, actuals are collected, resource plans are created, that information can come back in and populate these roadmap items as well. Okay, and you saw a very quick example of how I can just simply drag and drop a roadmap item directly onto the screen. Another way that you can do that, and something that we've seen bring a lot of value very quickly, is you could simply drop a CSV file directly into this roadmapping view and get going with doing this type of work. So what I really mean by that is we provide a template out of the box that has a couple of fields, and most of our customers have an Excel file out there or just a simple list of potential investments. You can grab that list and load it up here and start doing what I've shown right away. This is a very, very lightweight process, and we've seen, within one day, you can load this up and start creating and slicing and dicing and organizing it in the ways that I showed very, very quickly. Okay, so we've looked at the visualization side of road mapping and how we can use it. I wanted to now take a look at, let's see, the more detailed side. And really, this is the data behind those roadmap items that we created. So the context of what swim lanes do these investments fall in, and the more detailed data behind those targets that we created as well. So those of you who are familiar with our portfolio planning in the waterline view, you'll see some similarities between that view and the view that I'm about to show right now. Okay, so in this view, you can see we have all of the investments, several different columns that I brought in about the investments themselves. And I can quickly change these columns. It's very simple for me to simply check off things into the roadmap. So you can see how easy it is for me to remove or add an item. Very flexible. Of course, you can use objects that you created over here as well, or attributes, excuse me, that you created inside this roadmap view. And the way that this will work is these targets work a lot like those targets on the waterline view will work. I can simply set how this target would work. In this case, I'm looking at benefit, which is a goal, as opposed to a constraint. And then we have capital costs, which I can quickly set here, and an operating cost, which I can quickly set as well. Now, when I move investments in and out of the plan, we will see how these accumulate and affect these different constraints or goals that we're using in the business. Now, in order to do this process, we've created a couple of ways that you can tag your investments to help streamline it, make it a lot easier for you to take a look at. And one of these is the concept of how must-haves will work in these investments. So the first item is, of course, carryover investments. So these are things that have already been funded. We know we're going to continue to work on these. Maybe they're from a prior year, so we can make sure that we've added them into our plan here. Then maybe we also have some investments that we've tagged as required. So these could be, a part of a regulation or a federal requirement as well. And then finally, the concept of top choice. So if you go and ask people in the business and ask stakeholders for their required investments, we found that give them the opportunity to rank priority. You get a lot of very highs. And then when you accept that, there's implied consent that you're going to get it all done. So we found a better practice is to say, which are the 1, 2, or 3 investments that you absolutely cannot live without, and give them the opportunity to label those as top choices. So I'm going to click those in now. And now I'm filtering my overall roadmap into those top three categories. So now we're just looking at things that we have to have in our plan. And I'm going to check all of these in to the plan now. Okay, so now we've got all of our must-haves in the plan. You can see we have a little bit of extra capital expenditure available and a little bit of extra operational dollars as well. We're actually already exceeding our benefits target, so how awesome is that? But we have some more dollars to play with, so let's remove this filter and look at what we have left to add in. Now, I think a good place to start, just as an example, maybe we want to emphasize a return for the remaining investments. So I can bring a column over. Let's see, I have ROI here. I'm going to bring that over so we have a little bit easier time seeing it. And I can sort these investments based on the ROI. We put the highest on the top. And you can see there's a few investments over here that we haven't put in the plan yet, but I can start to see based on this high ROI percentage, let me add a few of these in, how many more of these can we add in before we start running out of dollars here? Oh, and now it looks like we finally exceeded our operating target, and now we've exceeded our capital target if I add these in. So you can see it's very, very easy for me to first make sure we get everything done that is required of the business, and then we can create ranking rules and sort through the different investments and really nail down what else we can get done. Now, all of this plan can get completed before the investments are even kicked off in the very beginning. So we have that idea of what do we even have the availability to do first, where are our resources, and how are we going to attack and make sure we can achieve the outcomes set forth by our stakeholders. So that's a quick view through what we call constraint-based planning in the road mapping tool. Okay, now finally, we also have a board view that comes along with the road mapping tool as well. And when we're looking at the board view in CAPPM, this again is a way to organize, a very visual way to be able to see how our investments are aligned in our business. Right now I'm looking at it from the different strategies that we're employing, but I can change this as well. So let's look at it from overall status here. So now we've created something like a pipeline view where you can quickly come in and see where are our investments, where are they landing. And this is drag and drop. So as things are moving, I can quickly organize this into the different buckets. And we can create as many different ways to slice it as you want. So I've shown a timeline type view, but we can also do this type of analysis from the standpoint of risk, for instance. So let's go look at this from an overall risk perspective. So now, same exact data, but now we have even more context that we can provide and another really easy to use view to show exactly how these different investments align into our system. Okay, so now I've come back to the timeline view. I know that was a quick run through, but I wanted to make sure that we were able to open this up for any type of the Q&A session as well. So that's a walkthrough of the different capabilities here. Now I think it's time for us to open this up to anyone who has any questions. Be happy to stand by and answer as many as you have today. And thank you again.
Well, that was a very, very good overview. Thank you, Brian. I enjoyed that a lot. We got some good questions coming in, people that have definitely followed along. Jump right to more of a summary. There was someone who wanted to have a little bit better understanding of the project, how they actually correlate back to these roadmaps. If you make changes in the project, does that show here and vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely. So once the investment has begun, you can link an investment item directly to the live project in PPM. So to give you an example, I'm going to click on this project here, and we can see this minimum online shopping cart. We've now this linked icon directly to the minimum online shopping cart, which is inside PPM. Now, we talked a little bit also about how we can save different scenarios. So you have the option to sync this, just like you do in the current PPM portfolios. I can come over and say that we'd like to go ahead and sync these linked items. And I can bring in all of these different data sets from the different projects themselves. So as they're executing, I can choose when to sync, and we can sync all of these attributes up with live data.
Very good. And if you have just an idea that you're sort of starting to crowdsource almost, can you sort of add metrics to that? If it's just
Absolutely.
and it could be a full-fledged investment going long-term, but you just want to start out with a kernel.
That's exactly right. So you saw me load and drop on just a lightweight investment. So this doesn't, when I create an investment on a roadmap like this, we've just created a roadmap item. So at this point, we can begin to add targets and data. And then when this actually moves into an approved project and we start building out a project plan, then we can sync that up and add additional data points as they appear.
Very good. And if you have a good roadmap and you want to copy it and make, use that almost like a template and start off with something else, is that easy to do?
Yes, that is something that's very easy to do. Yep.
We don't have to go into the structure of the licensing because everybody can have access to it. You work with different people at different stages in the road mapping. Once you come to the point where you have you're done, it's time to execute, how do you signal that to the project teams? Is there a way inside the tool that we can do that?
Yes. So once there's several ways that you can do that. Some of them can involve a workflow. Some of them can involve directly communicating within the tool through our conversations piece. I'd say very often it's involved in an approval process. So something that is approved will then move on and become created as a project in PPM. Now, you can also just use the roadmap itself to communicate the plan out and give direction to your project management teams of what they need to do as well.
Gotcha. Here we have a manageable number of investments. What's best practices if you have hundreds, if not thousands of investments that you need to map out in this way? Do you use sublayer? How do you nest or portfolio organize this?
Yes, that's a great question. Now, there's several ways you can do this. I'd say one way is if you are looking at several hundred investments, I would ask, is this on any type of hierarchy? Are these investments part of a larger program, which are maybe part of a larger product? And you can create different levels of this roadmap that we saw here. So right now, I'm looking at it. This minimal online shopping site could potentially be composed of several sub-projects that are rolling up into it. So we can create a highest level view where we're simply doing this at the strategy level, how are we going to execute. But then we can additionally create individual product roadmaps, individual program roadmaps, and have a layered approach, I think that was alluded to in that question.
Very good, very good. There's a quick question about the swim lanes. Can custom swim lanes be added?
Absolutely. And it's very, very easy to do so. This is not an admin function. So if I'm trying to create a new swim lane, I can show you how easy this is. I simply say click new, and I give it a name. I'll call it a new swim lane. And then I can just quickly build out additional swim lane choices. So I'll say just call it 1 and 2 just to show you. And so we can begin to just create this very quickly on the fly, and then you saw it drag and drop them into their appropriate swim lanes.
Excellent. Yeah, for anyone who's wondering if this is complex or not, I'm a marketing guy. We are using this and the Kanban board we saw earlier in our marketing group. So if we can do it, you can all do it. That was a great overview. Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciated you taking time. And for all of you who came on the show, if there's any questions you have still that lingers, please use our CAPPM communities. Most likely you're not the only one who have the question about this. So if you ask it there, we can answer it en masse. See you next month. Bye-bye.